Hello, I'm Dr. Julia Martin Burch.
And I'm Dr. Michelle Silverman, and we're here from the McLean School Consultation Service. Today, we're going to talk about surviving quarantine with your teen. Our goal for today is to provide you with a few simple evidence-based techniques to help you and your family manage during this unprecedented time. We're going to be jumping around a little bit, but these are some of the most bang for your buck skills. The topics we're going to cover today include common reactions to COVID-19 that teens and adults may be experiencing, validating responses that parents can use with their teens and themselves, tips for boosting mood and resilience, and strategies for coping with difficult emotions. Finally, we'll provide answers to some of the questions we received from you.
Okay, so now we're just going to talk briefly about common reactions to COVID. A lot of parents have asked me and other members of our team in recent weeks, is it normal for my kid or my teen to be doing fill in the blank? And my answer is usually there's no one way to react to a life-changing event. There is no normal reaction. And that's because during times of significant stress and change, such as the time we're living in now, there's a large spectrum of how kids and adults alike are reacting and coping. Some are doing and feeling okay, where others are feeling out of control and emotionally reactive. And teens' reactions can vary quite widely in range. Some may be feeling calm. In fact, some kids and adolescents are actually feeling less stressed with the removal of some of the academic demands and social demands and staying at home. Others are acting out, so refusing to socially distance, not engaging in school. Others are having trouble identifying their feelings, or they're feeling confused during this time of a lot of uncertainty. Others are just feeling really sad about not being able to see their friends or do the activities that they're normally able to do. Others are withdrawing. A lot of teens are worried about their future, their family, their friends. And you might also find that these emotional reactions fluctuate from moment to moment, and they're influenced by a lot of factors like sleeping, inactivity, eating, and the ever-changing events that seem to happen day to day. But let's talk about the goals of adolescence because these challenges are often particularly amplified for teens. And this is because adolescence is a time of great transition in which teens attain independence, they develop deeper and more complex relationships, and they develop a sense of self and identity. And a lot of teens accomplish these goals by increasing time spent with peers and romantic partners and decreasing time spent with family. And obviously, COVID turns these goals upside down and makes it very, very difficult for teens to achieve them. They can't go out with friends, they have limited opportunities for school engagement, and they may also have a sense of hopelessness and uncertainty about the future. Teens are primed to be focused on themselves and their peer group. Their activities and their rites of passage are now being disrupted, and they're missing events such as plays and performances and sports competitions and graduations and in-person time with friends or romantic partners. And so, given all that, we have to acknowledge grief. During this time that there is a lot that's not in our control right now, grief is going to naturally arise. There's a tremendous amount of loss. And it's really important to make room for that. As we mentioned, teens are experiencing the loss of so much right now. And as parents, your job is to take those losses seriously and to make room for your teen to be really, really sad about them if that's how they're feeling. But let's talk about parent reactions to COVID. Obviously, just kidding with our picture here. But we do need to recognize that you parents are coping with a lot of stressors and your own emotional reactions to this outbreak and to our current circumstances. I think one of the biggest things that we have to call out is just how many hats, how many roles you guys are all being asked to carry right now. It can feel absolutely crushing, and can have so many stressors on your plate. So finances, family members getting sick, food insecurity, balancing childcare, other responsibilities. You might be worrying about your kids' academic futures, their emotional needs, their mental health. A lot of parents feel as though they are failing as a parent or caretaker, or at least struggling with that fear. And at the same time, you might also be experiencing a sense of gratitude along with the stressors. Things like spending more time with family. It's kind of a slower pace of life. Seeing your kids be resilient, feeling a sense of unity with your community. So the impact on parents cannot be understated, as you all know. So in summary, there is no normal reaction to the pandemic. It's important to acknowledge feelings of loss and grief for your teen and for yourself. And of course, seek out help from a professional if you're ever concerned about your teen. It never hurts to have a conversation with your pediatrician.
Now that we've talked about the impact that the pandemic is having on kids and parents, let's talk about some ways that you can support yourself and your teen during this stressful time. Specifically, we're going to talk about how to use validation to maintain a supportive and compassionate response. During moments of high stress like we're in now, it's natural to feel more irritable, reactive, or judgmental of ourselves or others. This can lead us to withdraw in the home or cause our interactions to feel more short, tense, and focused on getting the other person to start or stop doing something. In other words, it can create a really uncomfortable and tense home environment. If we only listened with the same passion that we feel about being heard. This is a quote from Harriet Lerner, a famous psychologist known for her research on relationships, which I think aptly captures the importance of just listening. I'm sure that we've all been in those situations where we share our feelings with a family member or a friend, like telling them about a hard day at work, and they respond with something like, "Oh, it's not that bad," or "You're overreacting," or "Things could be much worse." It feels incredibly hurtful and frustrating to not have our feelings acknowledged. On the flip side, a validating response, such as, "That sounds really hard," or "Of course you're upset," feels really soothing to us in those moments. We're all human, and we all share that universal desire to feel heard and understood. So, what is validation? Validation is an act that acknowledges and communicates that someone's feelings make sense given a particular situation. When you validate, you demonstrate to the speaker that you're listening, you understand, and that you care about the relationship. And when teens feel heard and understood, they're less likely to become defensive or argumentative. In fact, they may actually be more willing to see your point of view because they feel like you're invested in them and you've taken the time to understand where they're coming from. Research shows that validation reduces both psychological and physiological distress and improves emotion regulation. So, a simple validating statement to your teen can actually reduce their emotional intensity, thereby reducing conflict. One really important thing to note about validation is that you can validate someone's feelings without necessarily agreeing with or condoning their behavior. So, for example, if your teen screams, "I hate you," you can validate their feelings by saying, "I understand that you're angry," which is not the same thing as saying, "And I like the way you spoke to me." Validation does not mean agreement. I'm going to repeat that again. Validation is not agreement. You can validate the feelings without the behavior. And I personally have worked with lots of teens in our clinic and in other places who can become really emotionally dysregulated at times and can scream or say hurtful things. And it definitely doesn't feel great to be the target of that anger. And I, like some of you, might have your urge when teens are doing those things to roll your eyes or sigh or sometimes even laugh. But it's really important to do your best to listen for the emotion that they're trying to express and to validate it. So, how do we validate? The first step is to actively listen. This means stopping whatever else you might be doing and giving your teen your total undivided attention. It means making eye contact, nodding, and using other nonverbal gestures to indicate that you're listening. The next step is to find a word that describes how your teen is feeling. So, for example, you can say, "It sounds like you're feeling disappointed," or "It makes sense that you feel sad," or "You're angry, I see that." By labeling the emotion, not only are you helping to increase your teen's emotional awareness, but you're also reducing the intensity of that emotion. Now, for those of you sitting there thinking, "I'm not a therapist," I hear you. And this might feel a little uncomfortable at first, but I promise that it works. And you don't have to use the classic, "It sounds like you're feeling blank." Find your own style. The most important thing is that you communicate to your teen that you hear them. If your teen says how they're feeling in that moment, then you can gently reflect it back without judgment. So, for example, if your teen says, "I'm really pissed off," you can say, "Yeah, you're really mad right now." It's important to be non judgmental when doing it. So, for example, you wouldn't want to say, "There's no reason to be mad," or "Yeah, I see you're angry," in a sarcastic voice, because that would cancel out any positive impact. It would be invalidating, which is the opposite of what we want to do. And sometimes teens might not know how they're feeling. and it might not be obvious to you. In those situations, I encourage you to get curious with them. So you can say something like, I really want to understand what you're feeling right now. Can you help me with that? Or, I get the sense that you're feeling a little blank. Am I getting that right? And by doing that, you're showing them that you care and that you want to understand without necessarily telling them what they're feeling. And for those of you with teens who might snap at you if you try to validate, and I hear you because I've seen it, sometimes just sticking with nonverbal validation is enough. So that might look like just sitting with your teen, giving them your full attention, and nodding when they speak. You don't even necessarily have to use words. Finally, a really, really important tip about validation is that when you do it, you have to stick the landing. What I mean by that is after you validate, make sure you pause and let it sink in. So kind of like with our Olympian gymnasts who hold their pose for a few seconds after they land, you really want to stick that landing. It's really tempting to jump right to problem solving, but that's not going to be effective, and it's actually just going to cancel out the validation if you do it too quickly. For example, if I say to my child, it makes sense that you're feeling bored, but you can just go outside or FaceTime a friend, it just cancels out the first part, that validating part. Again, this can be really tempting to do as parents because naturally it's hard to see your kids suffer, and oftentimes you as parents have really practical ideas for how to fix the problem. But again, if you jump to problem solving too quickly, it erases the impact of the validation. So if you know that you're a parent who tends to jump to problem solving, my challenge for you is to try to notice that urge when you're talking to your teen and remember to stick the landing. So here's an example that might resonate with some of you. The teen says, it's not fair that prom was canceled. So a validating response could be, it makes sense that you're feeling frustrated and disappointed about not being able to see your friends right now. And again, as tempting as it might be in that situation to quickly jump in and offer advice or a suggestion, remember to pause and stick the landing. Once you've validated your teen and made sure to stick the landing, you want to assess your teen's level of emotional distress. If it seems that they have calmed down and are in a more, let's say, rational place, then you can try gently encouraging effective behavior. So in other words, you've acknowledged and validated their feelings, and now you want to help them take a step forward. So this can look like helping them solve a problem, or reminding them why it's important to still do something even though it's hard, or maybe encouraging them to use a skill or doing it with them. Maybe one of the skills that we're going to talk about today. So we've got some examples up there. It makes sense that you feel sad about prom being canceled. Pause, stick the landing. Is there anything you can think of doing to still create special memories with your friends? Another example, I understand that you're feeling unmotivated by virtual school. Again, pause. And at the same time, keeping up with your classes will make school feel more manageable in the fall. Here's a little therapist tip. Using and instead of but in these situations sends the message that your teen can cope and react effectively even when experiencing difficult emotions. So the and kind of shows that two things can be true at the same time, whereas a but sort of cancels out the first part. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the encouraging effective behavior, this process only works if your teen has calmed down. If you find that they're still highly emotional or reactive, just stick with validation. So now that we've walked through the steps of how to validate our children and our teens, let's take a minute to talk about how we validate ourselves. Oftentimes, we can be our worst critics. And given all the things that parents are juggling right now, it's easy to judge yourself for not doing enough or not doing things as well as you might normally do, particularly when it comes to parenting. You might be letting your kids have more screen time than you normally would, or having more difficulty focusing on your own work. And that's okay. Trust me, you're not alone in that. The first thing to do when you notice yourself feeling emotional or having those kinds of self-critical thoughts is to pause and check in with yourself. You can ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Notice what you're thinking. Notice what you're feeling in your body. Ask yourself, what urges am I having? And I encourage you to stick to non-judgmental language. So an example of judgmental language would be, I haven't worked out all week, I'm so lazy. You also want to avoid shoulds and musts, like I should be coming up with more projects for my kids. Again, those are invalidating, which is the opposite of what we want to do. And just like we discussed with validating teens, you want to acknowledge that your feelings make sense given the circumstances. So, for example, you can tell yourself, it makes sense that I would feel more irritable with my kids right now. You want to be fair to yourself. Don't discount or apologize for how you feel, because again, that would be invalidating. I find that sometimes it helps to repeat a self compassionate mantra, such as, I'm doing the best I can, or nobody's perfect. It's helpful to pause and try to say the mantra before you react. So, for example, if you hear your kids getting into a fight upstairs, this might look like taking a deep breath and telling yourself, I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best before going upstairs to deal with the situation. And remember, parents, it's okay to not be okay right now. Your feelings are always valid. So let's practice. I want you to think of a recent challenging interaction that you've had with your teen. An example could be, let's say that your teenager wanted to stay up late to watch TV, but you said that they needed to go to bed. Probably a common one for some of you. Next, notice and describe your feelings as you recall this event. Maybe you feel annoyed or exasperated. Maybe even a little resentful because maybe this is a battle you've had before. Next, acknowledge that your feelings were understandable given the situation. In other words, validate yourself. So I might tell myself it makes total sense to be feeling annoyed and exasperated with my teen in that situation. Now I want you to look for a word that describes what your teen might have been feeling in that moment. For example, frustrated or annoyed. Now try validating that feeling. For example, it's understandable that she felt frustrated in that situation. She really wanted to watch the end of the show. And finally, I want you to think of a time in the next 24 hours when you'll make a point to use validation with your teen. So for example, let's say tomorrow morning when your teenager doesn't want to get out of bed, you might say, I understand that you're feeling tired and probably not very motivated to get out of bed. I'm not saying that you have to stay there. You can then move to, and I know it's important, and it's important for you to be present in your advisory check-in. But imagine what a different tone for the day is set when you validate that, yes, it can be understandably tough to get out of bed in the morning versus a different response. Try to notice any differences in your own reaction and in your teen's reaction.
Okay, so now we're going to be shifting gears to a key topic for everyone, but particularly for teens: boosting mood and maintaining resilience when life is so far from normal. So here are the components of keeping oneself strong and resilient. We're going to walk through each, but just a quick overview: eat, sleep, move, get active. And this is not just exercise. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means, and particularly faking it till you make it, building mastery, and then maintaining mood and resilience by setting and working through goals. So eat, sleep, move, AKA things we all know are really important for mental health, but they're so important we wanted to briefly review them with you. So as you know, balancing what we eat, getting sufficient sleep, moving our bodies is key to staying mentally healthy. And there's actually a lot of quarantine-friendly ways to do this. We're 8-9 weeks into the quarantine now, or whenever you're watching this, it's been a while, so you're probably learning some of these, but get creative with your teens, right? Try some of the online classes together. There's all kinds of cool workout classes. Have them practice cooking balanced meals for the family, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But figure out how you can do this in a quarantine-friendly way with your teen. And I just want to say, like, we all know these things are important, right? Eating and sleeping and moving our bodies. But somehow, many of us, myself included, keep getting to the end of the day and finding that, like, we didn't eat any fruits or vegetables, or we didn't move our body, or my personal kryptonite, suddenly it's 1 a.m. and I'm still on email. I wonder if that resonates with anybody watching this right now. And so one of the best ways to ensure that these basic building blocks of mental health happen is to base our routine around them. So start with consistent wake and sleep times, just have meals at a consistent time, build in exercise at a consistent time, and then everything else in your routine kind of falls into place around it. But if you build the routine around eat, sleep, move, it makes it more likely that this will happen. So model this for your teen. or consider having a family routine in place that everyone has to participate in. So getting active. The key point here is that when we say get active, we don't just mean exercise. We mean engage in activities that make you feel good. So just a quick background on why this is important. Anxiety and low mood fill our bodies with neurochemicals that lead to lethargy and to agitation. And this causes us to withdraw from the things in life that make us feel good. But by adding in activity, we burn off those unhelpful neurochemicals. We increase the production of positive neurochemicals like endorphins, and we create opportunities for positive reinforcement, such as feelings of accomplishment, smiles from others, feelings of competence, stuff that makes us feel good. So what we do changes how we feel. That's a really important point because when we feel sad, kids, teens, adults alike, we tend to withdraw from activities that we used to enjoy due to energy or lack of energy, or lack of motivation. And this is especially true during social distancing, right? When our teens aren't really able to engage with the people and the activities that usually provide them with feelings of happiness and give them that social reinforcement. But if you're able to get up and do a mood boosting activity, more on some ideas for those in a minute, even if the mood boosting activity is hard, you can take control over your mood and feel a little bit better. But importantly, it's totally okay to fake it till you make it. You won't necessarily feel better immediately from getting active, or the technical term for this is behavioral activation, in case anyone's interested. But it can have a cumulative effect. So it's so important to remember, you don't wait to feel better before you start doing something. You have to start doing something in order to feel better. And so faking it till you make it. We also want you to get creative. In a couple slides, we're going to talk through some different quarantine-friendly ideas. And then a really key thing is noticing your impact, the impact on your mood after and before you do the activity. So how did you feel before? How did you feel afterwards? So the concept of behavioral activation basically means identifying activities from the categories above and incorporating them into daily life with the goal of improving mood. Key thing, the activity doesn't have to fall into all of these categories, but just to quickly talk through them, the activity could be fun. So this is basically just something that brings joy, even if it doesn't sound fun right now because you're feeling down or your teen's feeling kind of depressed or just saying things don't feel fun. It can be something that used to bring joy. Second category, goal-driven. So this is an activity that would make you or your teen feel proud or like you've accomplished something, even if you don't have fun doing it. So this could be like cleaning out a backpack or a purse, organizing your desk, finishing a project, practicing driving if it's a teen working towards their license. Social. So this would be an activity that involves being around other people or helping other people. So these can be things like going on a walk with a friend 6 feet apart, going to a movie, watching a movie on your couch with friends, because there's all these cool apps right now where you could do that, or talking with a friend, while you both eat lunch on your screens while looking at each other. Final category, active. So this is something that uses energy. This can be something like walking the dog, doing jumping jacks, going for a hike, getting into nature, going for a bike ride, getting active. So just remember, the activity doesn't have to be ideal to be effective. Walking while you are on a conference call can still have benefits. If you decide to make art, it does not have to be the Mona Lisa. It can just be doodles on a napkin or on the back of your notebook, but it's doing something in one of these categories. So here are a bunch of different quarantine-friendly ideas for boosting mood. Take a minute and look over this. You can take a screenshot if you want to come back to it later. But just think, what on here can you do that would be a mood booster? And what kind of thing might your teen enjoy? What can you suggest to your teen? Okay. So building mastery. Similar to that goal-driven category of mood boosting activities, but parents, this is your big chance. Seriously though, learning new skills and having a feeling of accomplishment can protect against depression. And again, it's your big chance to get your teen doing things like cleaning and cooking and taking more of a part in your household. So think about what skills your child or teen might not know that you want them to learn. Pick one, break it into steps, Teach them one step at a time and have them start practicing. This, to be fair, when we're also strapped and pulled in a million directions, it is more work for you up front, but there is a big payoff for you both in the long run. There's also likely a payoff for your teen in the short run, even if they grumble about not wanting to clean or cook. That feeling of accomplishment, like you're building mastery and you're learning a new skill, goes a long, long way to protect against low mood and to keep us resilient in times of stress. So how do we maintain getting active? How do we maintain boosting mood? We have to set goals and we have to keep them going. So I know for myself, whenever I'm starting some kind of new initiative, I want to set like 12 goals because I get super, super excited about it. And it can be really, really tempting, right, to set many lofty goals. But ideally, surely there's other people watching this who do the same thing I do. And then a week down the road, you realize you've really only been able to maintain one or two of them. Ideally, just pick one or two and make them really specific. So things like, I will walk around my block once after each meal I eat today. Specific, and also make them measurable. You want to know if you've achieved your goal or not. So in this case, I know what my block is. I know that I will have completed it. It's tied to a time, meals, so I know if I will have walked after my meals. We'll do an exercise on this in a minute, but the principle to keep in mind here is when you are setting goals, you want to keep them specific and measurable. So it's important to remember change can be gradual. You shouldn't necessarily expect an immediate mood boost. It's something that can happen gradually over time, but it has a cumulative effect. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but I really, really want to drive the point home because this can help maintain motivation as you work on these goals. Observe mood and energy before and after. This is something you can easily do with yourself, but if you're working with your teen to help them start getting a little bit more active or working on building mastery, you can just get curious with them. Hey, I noticed you were, feeling kind of down before and you're smiling a little bit more now. I wonder if how you're feeling. How was that for you? That kind of thing. So let's practice. I would like you all to choose one area, just one, again, keeping it small, to focus on for yourself. So this could be an eat, sleep, move category. It could be getting active. So that's that behavioral activation. It could be physically actually getting active, but it could be fun, social, goal-driven, or building mastery. So think about one area that you want to focus on in the next couple days. Then when you've got it, I want you to set just one goal for yourself in that area. Be very specific. Make sure it's measurable so you know that you've achieved it. And once you've thought about this for yourself, think about an activity that you might be able to do with your teen as well. Doesn't always go fantastically well when parents insist, teen, you must do X, Y, or Z thing because it'll make you feel better. But think about something you can do with your teen that would be pleasurable so that you can teach them this concept in a more engaging way. So maybe playing a game, going for a bike ride, baking something special together.
We've now arrived at our fourth and final topic for today, coping with difficult emotions. We're going to talk about some easy, effective, and evidence-based crisis management skills that you can use on yourself and teach to your teens when emotions are running high. And while there are tons of coping skills out there, and we certainly encourage you to try different ones and find what works best for your family, these are the three that we have found to be most helpful and popular among the kids and teens that we work with. Before we jump into the skills, let's talk about when to use them. I want you to first picture your feelings as falling on a thermometer from 0 to 10, where 0 means that you don't feel the emotion at all, and 10 means that you feel it really intensely, and a 5 would be somewhere in the middle. The skills that we're about to teach should be used when emotions are in the high range, like above a 7. We can sort of think of that as the danger zone. And when we're in that danger zone, emotions are so high that we're not really thinking clearly, and we're likely to act on impulsive urges, like yelling or saying something hurtful. And that's when we want to stop and try one of these crisis management skills that I'm about to teach you. I like to think of them as sort of like fire extinguisher skills. It's important to note that these crisis management skills are for short-term, temporary use only. Their job is to help take down the temperature of the emotion, not to solve the problem. So I'm going to say that one more time. Their goal is to take down the intensity of the emotion or that temperature, not to solve the problem. Fire extinguishers don't build a fire-resistant house. They allow us to cool down a little so that we can think before we act. Another tip, it's helpful to practice these skills when emotions are low. It gives you time to try them out and figure out what works best for you so that you're really prepared in those moments when emotions are high. Quick side note, when our emotions are in that low to medium range, that's when we want to use other skills like problem solving or other emotion regulation strategies that will help us in the long run. Today, though, we're just going to focus on those crisis management or fire extinguisher skills to use when teens are in the danger zone. Just like you would on an airplane, it's important for parents first to put on their oxygen mask before helping their teen. In other words, before you teach these skills to your teen, I really strongly encourage you to try them out for yourself and to practice and continue using them whenever your emotions are high. In doing so, not only are you modeling how to use them for your teen, but you're also making sure to bring down your own temperature so that you're not reacting impulsively. We've all had those moments when we've said or done something in the heat of the moment that we regret, and these skills will hopefully help prevent that from happening. Real talk for a second, though. Responding to kids and teens when their emotions are at a 9 or 10 can be exhausting. It really wears us out too. So if there's another caregiver in the home who can swap out with you when your own thermometer is at a 9 or 10, that will give you a chance to use a skill to cool off a little before responding to your teen. And lastly, in order to promote and reinforce skill use, be sure to praise your teen when you see them using a skill. This can look like a thumbs up, a nod, a smile, or just saying, nice job using a skill. Okay, let's dive in. The first skill we're going to talk about is using cold temperature. So ice diving involves filling a bowl or sink with ice cold water, holding your breath and submerging your face in it for 30 seconds. And what this does is it triggers what's known as the diver's reflex or the mammalian diving reflex, which is our body's tendency to maintain homeostasis. And it actually triggers our parasympathetic nervous system, which calms us down and is the opposite to that fight or flight system that we all know. And it kicks into gear, and what it does is it slows down our heart rate and it slows down our breathing. And in doing so, it helps bring down emotional arousal, and it does it quickly. So other things you can do if you don't have a bowl available or you just want to try other kind of adaptations of this skill is you can hold an ice pack on your eyes or cheeks. You can run cold water over your wrists or splash your face. You can hold a frozen washcloth or even frozen veggies over your cheeks. You can hold ice cubes in your hands, or you can put your cheek or forehead against a cold window. Of all the skills that we teach kids in our clinic, this is by far the most popular, and it's especially effective when emotions are at a 9 or 10. It kicks in really quickly. And what's nice about cold temperature is that, like I said, it works fast and it doesn't require much planning or thinking. You just got to go to the fridge, grab those frozen peas. Quick warning though, if you or someone in your family has an underlying condition such as a heart problem, use good judgment before trying the skill. The next skill we're going to discuss is called A to Z list. This is another popular one that many of the kids we work with in our clinic like to use. The way it works is you pick a category and go through the alphabet, finding an example that starts with each letter. So for example, if you chose animals as the category, you would say, or you could say A for alligator, B for baboon, C for cat, D for dog, etc. And you can do this with any category. You can do countries, foods, stores, celebrities, books, etc. And this is what we refer to as a mindfulness skill or a grounding skill, because what it does is it anchors our thoughts in the present moment. It helps us focus on this one activity, which then takes our mind off of whatever was upsetting us. And again, remember, like all of these crisis management skills, it's not going to solve the problem, but it will help take emotions down temporarily. What I really like about this skill too is that it's something that kids can do on their own, either in their head or they can write it on a piece of paper, or it's something that you can do together. It's also a nice skill to use with the whole family when everyone's emotions are high, which can happen at like dinner time, for example. And I've worked with some families where parents will just call a timeout and have everyone in the family participate in a round of A to Z. And not only does it help take emotions down, but it can also lead to just having some fun and some laughs. Okay, the final crisis management skill that we're going to talk about today is called 5-4-3-2-1 senses. For this skill, you simply use your surroundings to identify 5 things that you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So for example, you might look around and notice the window or the desk or a lamp. You might hear sounds from another room, something from outside, humming, your own breathing. For things you can touch, it could be like the table in front of you. It could be your feet touching the ground or your hands in your lap. For things you can smell, if there's nothing kind of obvious in the air, you can smell your hair or your shirt. And for taste, sometimes we have a lingering taste in our mouth from something we ate earlier, or it just might be the taste of your saliva. Just like with A to Z lists, this is also a mindfulness or grounding technique that helps us focus our attention and thoughts on the present moment, which helps reduce emotional arousal. It's also a skill that kids can do on their own or that you can do with them. And 5-4-3-2-1 senses is also a nice skill that you can adapt with other categories. So you can use colors or shapes. You could say, find 5 blue things in the room, 4 red things, 3 silver, 2 yellow, etc. I really like using senses best though, because by drawing on all 5 senses, you're really pulling yourself into the present moment. Okay, time to practice. The first thing that I want you to do is recall an emotionally intense experience. Really reflect on how you felt in that moment. For example, what thoughts came up? What did you notice in your body? What urges did you have in that moment? Really put yourself back in that moment. Next, notice the intensity of your current emotion as you recall this experience. Label the emotion or emotions. Then rate their intensity on a scale from 0 to 10, where 10 is the most intense and 0 is the least. Next, choose one of the 3 skills that we've talked about, either temperature, A to Z, or 5 senses, and practice it for 2 minutes. After, what I want you to do is take note of your emotions and the intensity, again from 0 to 10. What thoughts are you having? What body sensations? What urges are you experiencing? And finally, I want you to think of a time in the next 24 hours when you will practice this skill again.
Okay, so for the final topic on our agenda, we're going to answer some of the questions that we received from you. Due to the high volume of questions we received, we unfortunately are not able to get to every single question. However, we've tried to focus on a few questions that highlight common themes we were hearing from many of you. And we wanted to take a moment to share with you all that we were really struck by how the same themes kept coming up over and over again in the questions that we received. Broadly speaking, these themes were, my child or teen is socially isolating, they're having difficulty engaging in work or paying attention, or they're acting out, becoming aggressive, or misbehaving at home. And we wanted to share this with you all because we know that it can feel incredibly isolating right now. And know that you're not alone. For what it's worth, there are so many other parents out there experiencing these exact same concerns.
Question number 1. How can I help my child when he is getting emotional or frustrated during homework time? For example, due to slow internet connection. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do here is to validate his frustration or validate whatever emotion is rising up. So, for example, this would be saying something like, I understand that you're feeling frustrated with the slow internet connection. This is a tough situation, something like that. So if you need some tips, you can review the validation section of our presentation. After validating, which is important because as you may remember, by validating and naming an emotion, we decrease the intensity of the emotion. Sometimes we say name it to tame it. So after validating, you then want to encourage the use of a crisis management skill. So that's what we covered last in this presentation. Things like using ICE or the A to Z list or checking in with your 5 senses. So in the moment, validate, encourage him to use a skill to take the intensity of his emotion down. And of course, as we mentioned in the presentation, it's best to introduce those in a calm moment, not at the height of a crisis. And then do some problem solving together. So this would look like brainstorming some ideas to address the problem. So for example, can he reach out to his teacher if he's frustrated with content over homework? Can he ask for support from his counselor if he's consistently getting emotional trying to do schoolwork? Can he break his homework down into manageable steps? Could he move closer to the modem if the slow internet connection is part of the problem? A big one is, can he take time away from his screen when frustrated and use a skill? So coming up together with a series of options, and then the next time he gets frustrated, validate, kind of hand over that ice pack or say, hey, this is a great moment to use that A to Z list, and then let him put one of the problem-solving strategies that you came up with collaboratively into practice.
Question number 2. We have a 14-year-old son. Since everything has shut down, he has had almost zero contact with friends. On his birthday, we had to push him to see friends on Zoom. He ended up playing Fortnite with them and had a great time, but even so, he hasn't asked for a repeat. Is this total isolation normal? Should we be concerned? What can we do to help ensure he doesn't end up socially isolated for months on end? So we actually received a ton of questions on this topic, and we're hearing that social isolation has been a challenge for kids across age groups. So first of all, just know that your son is not alone in this. And I think it makes sense to be concerned, and it's great that you're on top of this, because losing social connections can definitely make kids vulnerable for future challenges like anxiety and depression. And as always, if you're feeling concerned, trust your gut, and it never hurts to reach out to your child's pediatrician or school counselor for more support. But at the same time, like we've talked about, a lot of kids are having difficulty right now just because of the particular circumstances. And we know that when kids fall out of their normal routine, it's easy for them to become more socially withdrawn, which can become a self-reinforcing cycle. We want to help him take some small steps to break that cycle and build momentum. And this might require that you provide a little more hands-on support than you normally might. I recommend that you talk directly to your son about the situation, and you can just start by sharing your observations in a really neutral, non-judgmental way. So you can say, like, I've noticed you haven't wanted to talk to your friends as much as you used to. Make sure to validate any feelings he shares, and as always, try to notice an urge to jump right to problem solving and stick that landing. And now might be one of those times when your child is having trouble identifying his emotions, or maybe he just shrugs or just says, I'm fine. So you might need to say something like, this is a hard time and I really want to understand how you're feeling. Or you can say, I know virtual hangouts aren't as fun as seeing your friends in person, and I could imagine feeling really disappointed or sad about that. Am I getting that right? You can also try to get some buy-in from him by sharing your observations that you've had around Zoom and Fortnite. So you could say, like, I noticed when you played Fortnite with your friends, it seemed like you were having fun. Let's think about some ways to keep that going. And if the video conferencing element feels overwhelming or anxiety producing for him, which I know it does for a lot of teens, maybe he could start with a smaller step, like just texting a friend, and then move on to something harder, like talking on the phone, and then playing a game on FaceTime. He could also practice talking to a close family member on Zoom, like a similar age cousin. After each step, help him reflect on how he felt afterward. So help him draw that connection between social activities and mood. That way he has some data to help him say, yeah, that did kind of improve my mood. And if he has a positive experience with a smaller step, then you can ask him, what's the next thing you want to do with friends? And what can I do to help you set that up? So you want to strike while the iron's hot.
Question number 3. How to handle when rising 7th graders' friends' parents are allowing them to play together while we are trying to observe strict social distancing. How likely are 12 and 13-year-olds to maintain social distance without parents present? This is a really tough one. I mean, you're in a really hard position. It's incredibly difficult when different families are following the rules in different ways, and it's understandable that kids and teens would feel confused and frustrated by why their family might be doing things differently when their friend is allowed to do something else. So in terms of how to address this with your teen, step 1 is to validate. Point out, of course, it makes sense that you would feel frustrated and confused when you see your friends doing something that you're not allowed to do. Then once you've kind of stuck the landing and let that sink in, because remember, we want to label and name that emotion. But then share your rationale for the social distancing. So, for example, my concern is that if I let you play with the other kids, you could get them sick or get yourself sick. Different families have different rationales. So, for example, one family might have an immunocompromised parent, another family might not. So, kind of explaining to your kid that different families might be approaching this differently, and this is how our family is going to approach it. I know that's frustrating. I know this isn't necessarily what you want. And then just checking the facts, helping your child remember, yes, this is really frustrating right now, but this isn't going to last forever. This is definitely not your forever. And so it's about riding out this really challenging period, knowing that things will more or less get back to normal. You certainly will be able to play with your friends in the future. In terms of the second part of the question, how likely are 12 and 13-year-olds to maintain social distance? Obviously, every kid is different. As we said at the beginning, some kids and teens are worried and anxious and are actually staying far apart without any prompting from parents. Others, not so much. I think something to keep in mind is that kids and teens' brains are still cooking and they don't have the same ability to reason through decisions and to think about consequences as we do as adults. They can also be a bit more impulsive than we are as adults. So they do need us typically to help them think through and make these decisions, and also think about how to maintain social distance.
Question number 4. My rising 7th grader is very aggressive toward me since this began. I'm finding it hard to establish and enforce boundaries. Can you say anything about what might be normal under these exceptional circumstances? How can one show empathy for their situation without letting them misbehave constantly? This is a really tough issue, and I really feel for you. Parents have so much on their plate right now, and of course it feels hard to establish and enforce boundaries. Our lives have been turned upside down. And again, kids definitely respond to stress and changes in routine in all different ways. You might see a fight, flight, or freeze reaction from your kid, or sometimes all three. And it sounds like in this situation, we've got a fighter. And we've definitely been hearing about upticks in challenging behaviors, including aggression, from a lot of families. That being said, unsafe behavior is not okay. I recommend finding a time when your child is calm and sitting them down to have a talk. Start with validation. So you can say, it's really hard not being able to go to school and see your friends and do a lot of fun things you're used to doing. It makes sense to feel mad or sad. By validating first, you're opening the door for a conversation and you're showing empathy. Then have a conversation about what behaviors are and are not acceptable in the home. Decide on consequences for aggressive behavior ahead of time. So it can be things like loss of screen time or other privileges. And let the child know that if you do X, the consequence will be Y. If they are aggressive, make sure that you consistently follow through on those consequences. And if they start to argue or negotiate, that's when you're going to turn off the spotlight and actively ignore. It's also helpful if you can try to catch your child when he or she starts ramping up. And that's a really good time to coach them to use one of the crisis management skills that we discussed earlier, like ice diving. I also encourage you to watch the Managing Behavior at Home section of our webinar for parents of younger children. Although it doesn't specifically discuss aggression, it does include tips for managing unskillful behavior. And using those skills can help prevent and minimize aggressive and other ineffective behaviors. And please, if you're concerned for your own safety or others in your home, call a crisis hotline such as the one listed on the screen.
Question number 5. How can I use this moment to encourage my child to be more helpful at home? I'm finding all the work involved with this, cleaning, etc., daunting, but I've never been very good about requiring more than the most basic chores. Could this be an opportunity to ask tweens and teens to take on new responsibilities? In a word, yes. Absolutely. That is such a great use of this moment. This is a great opportunity to teach your kid new skills that they need to know. You also learned in the boosting mood section of this presentation that actually learning new skills creates feelings of accomplishment. Even if kids and teens grumble at first about not wanting to do it, it can actually be protective for them to get that feeling of accomplishment and that feeling of mastery. So step 1 is for you to really think about what skills your child will eventually need to be able to do independently. So this is going to probably be a large, overwhelming list. So just pick 1 or 2 for a start. And also I should say, you can think about what they're going to need to do to live independently, but you can also just think about what do you need help with in this moment. Either one is a perfectly appropriate way to start, but pick one or two to start with and break it into steps, and then you scaffold their learning. So what that means is, for example, if you choose laundry, you want to first have them watch you do it, you explain how to do it, and then you watch them do it, and then you slowly phase yourself out. And you want to praise every single step of the way and tolerate when things go wrong, because whenever any of us are learning a new skill, inevitably we make mistakes along the way. So there might be that load of laundry that comes out pink, and your job is to kind of step back and grit your teeth and say, I love that you did the laundry. I really appreciate it. Let me show you how to not turn the laundry pink. So just another plug for getting your kid to do chores. There's actually some really cool research that doing chores is really helpful for kids and teens' mental health. It leads to all kinds of awesome outcomes. So if anybody's interested in that, you can look up the research. But by all means, get your teen or kid to help during this time. You are even improving their mental health by making them do chores more helpful at home.
Question number 6. Due to COVID, my partner is on the other side of the country. This makes establishing rules and enforcing them especially difficult as I have no reinforcement. Do you have any suggestions for parents who are single parenting, either temporarily or permanently, for how to manage this difficult time? First of all, I really appreciate this question because I know that there are a lot of parents out there who are trying to manage on their own, some of whom might also be taking care of sick or elderly parents. Taking care of kids and sticking to normal routines and rules is so hard right now. So first and foremost, please make time to fill up your own piggy bank so that you have the emotional resources to lift this heavy load on your own. And this might include using your own coping skills, engaging in small acts of self-care, and seeking support from other parents. Next, try to find a calm time, if such a thing even exists, to think through your household rules. Given the circumstances we're in, it's not really possible to juggle everything the way we were before, especially if you're used to having a partner around. So think about which rules you really need to enforce right now, and think about if there are any that you can temporarily let go of. In other words, choose your battles wisely. Once you've done that, sit down with your kids and review the plan. Be sure to include clear and specific consequences for not following through on the rules, and try to enforce those consequences as consistently as possible so that they maintain their power. And lastly, please be patient with yourself and validate what a hard situation you're in. I encourage you to try some of the self-validation strategies that we discussed, such as repeating a self-compassionate mantra like, I'm doing the best I can. Know that you're going to make mistakes, and remember that each day is a new opportunity to try again.
Question number 7. What recommendations do you have for children losing attention while doing online schoolwork, either not being able to focus or worse, toggling back and forth to games, etc.? I have work much of the time and can't constantly monitor. Yeah, this is really, really hard. I mean, we're experiencing this when we're working with kids, kind of seeing the clients that we see online as well. It's really hard to stay focused on the screen for that long. I think as adults, we can probably all empathize feeling this way as well in the endless Zoom meetings or social FaceTimes or things like that. So it's really hard to keep our attention on screens when they're not engaging video games for that long. So I think the first thing to think about is, this is not a normal time. Your child's academic output is likely not going to look like what their academic output is during normal school times. This is just a different time in terms of academic demands and academic output. However, we have a couple different ideas. So first, it can be really helpful to use timers. So if your child is losing attention while doing online schoolwork, it's possible that it's just too long of a stretch in this current medium for your child to be staying focused. So work with them to figure out what an appropriate time chunk would feel like, whether it's 20 minutes of, nonstop focus, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, but setting a timer, and so that they know, okay, I need to focus really well for the next 25 minutes, but then I get a break. And when they take these breaks, doing something to help kind of prepare themselves for another focus chunk sitting in front of the computer. So one of the best things you can do is a movement break, moving their body, go outside, run around your house a couple times, whatever it may be. Have a timer on that break so the break doesn't go on for the rest of the day, and then return, set the timer again, do another 25 minutes, etc. This is a really, really helpful technique. So really our number one suggestion is using timers. I think as well, breaking the assignment into small steps. It can feel overwhelming when you're just chipping away at this massive pile of online schoolwork. So breaking things into steps and coming up with just little ways that they can reward themselves, whether it's with a break or, a special snack or something like that, but to just kind of mark, okay, I made it through another assignment. So breaking it into steps. You can also work with your child to think about what are some maybe small rewards they can earn for completing entire assignments. So this can be potentially something that you're in charge of, or again, like I gave the snack example earlier, just little things that they can give themselves, maybe 5 minutes reading a book they really love or playing with their dog, just little things to kind of treat themselves. Additionally, you could come up, this is best implemented by parents, but are there any slightly bigger rewards that they can earn for staying focused and not needing you to intervene and make sure that they're staying on task? So this can be things like maybe they get to pick what dinner is for the family that night if they make it through the whole day of work without a parent needing to intervene. So I think this plan, it can take a little bit more upfront support from parents for the first couple of days, making sure that they're going with the timers and they're taking their breaks and getting the rewards as planned. But it's nice because once they're up and running, it can be pretty self-sustaining. I would also that's the frontline recommendation, but tech can be pretty amazing. And I would look into if there's any tech solutions to toggling back and forth to games and stuff like that. I know there's various apps that can block. I would also ask other parents what they're doing. I would also ask your child's teachers because they're an incredible resource. So beyond this, I would reach out and see how others are handling this because you are certainly not alone. We are hearing this from so many families right now.
Question number 8, our final question. Seeking suggestions for helping seniors deal with the challenges of missing out on so many of the rite of passage events. For her, it is the memories that she won't have that bring her to tears. I am by no means worried or concerned about her mental health, as I think we are handling it well, but it would be good to have some suggestions or maybe a different perspective on how to help her with the loss. So this is another question that we've been getting from tons of parents and schools across the board. And for those of you in this boat, it's true. You and your kids have worked so hard to get to this point, and it's really devastating to not be able to celebrate these big milestones in a big and traditional kind of way. And so my first piece of advice is to validate, 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 and really stick the landing here. This is so important. It's important to make room for the grief that seniors are experiencing right now. And so for parents, it can be really heartbreaking and overwhelming to see your child in distress. And you might feel an urge to try to make it all better or to try to jump right to making lemons out of lemonade, which is understandable. But it's so important right now to just acknowledge that loss and to say to your child, it's okay to feel sad right now, and just give them that space. And then after you've let that really sink in, you can help them take a step forward by problem solving together. You could say something like, I wonder if we can think of some ideas to still make this special for you. So we know that some schools are planning on postponing graduation ceremonies until later in the summer or fall, but there are also a lot of great ideas on the internet for things that you can do in May and June. So it might be worth doing a little research online. For example, some families are decorating their doors at home and hanging signs that say honk for the graduate. Some are helping to arrange car parades at school. You could help your teen make a photo slideshow of their favorite high school memories or bury a time capsule. They could also write a letter to their future self for college or make and exchange care packages with their friends. I do think it's also okay to reflect on some of the silver linings of all of this. Again, acknowledging that they in no way make up for the loss or grief that your kids are feeling. So for example, maybe this experience is helping them develop a deeper sense of gratitude for their health or their friendships. Or maybe they can try to make the most of this time by starting a special project or trying a new hobby or getting some pre-college tasks done early. Maybe some of these things they wouldn't have had as much time to do if they were still in school. So it's all about striking that balance between validation and acknowledging the grief and helping them make the most of the situation. And that concludes our tips for surviving the quarantine with your teen. Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope that you found these skills to be helpful and walk away with a few more tools in your toolkit to manage during this really stressful time.